And what I would say here is this is designed to be very interactive. I really would love the questions, really love the opportunity to hear the kinds of questions and challenges that you've got. So you got a little bit of my background and my intro, right? So I've been doing this for, as I said, a very long time. I've got lots of books. We've got the Secret SharePoint book. We have the SharePoint Shepherd series of books and materials that we've done. We were the first end user guide for SharePoint all the way back in 2008, and have been since then, providing a kind of end user support and trying to make this thing we call SharePoint, now Office 365, Microsoft 365, easy for folks to use. And so the Shepherd's Guide is just a whole bunch of tips that's now delivered via modern pages into your environment. I also have a book with my wife. We wrote a book, Extinguish Burnout. It's a practical guide to prevention and recovery. We did that for SHRM, for the Society of Human Resource Managers. As I said, I've got a very weird and odd background. So we did that, and that's, if you go to Extinguish Burnout, the course for that is free. 16 years as a Microsoft MVP. I'm sure you know what that program is. And then, my family likes to tell me I'm certifiable. And I believe them. I believe that people could certify me. I don't think it's about being crazy, but they may have a different point of view. All right, so as I talk through this, as we do this, most of what we're going to talk about today is detailed out in a white paper that's available for free. You can go to Thor Projects Connect Gifts, and you can get this, and you can get it in printed form, largely so you can share it with other people. One of the challenges that we find when we have this conversation is we end up having it a couple of times, because you're not the only person who has to make a decision. When we start talking about how do you build department sites, lots of folks tend to want to have a perspective on that. They want to, this is the way I think it should be. And so this gives you something that you can take along and share and go, hey, look at this. This is why, if you want to be successful with designing departmental sites, this is the way you should do it. So here's our agenda. Here's what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to talk about 2-in-1. We're going to talk a little bit about information architecture. Information architecture is one of those topics that I love and have done a lot of work on. And so we're just going to scratch the surface of that. And then we're going to do constructing the external site, and then we'll do constructing the internal site. And so that's kind of the flow we're going to have in this session. We'll probably run right at about 50 minutes to leave plenty of time for Q&A. But if there's a question you've got before that, certainly interrupt, and we'll get those questions answered. All right, this is serious. No. I mean, this is the star. It's serious. It is the brightest star in our sky. Yeah, except it's just not a star. It is really 2 stars. If you're looking at the screen, you can see, the big starburst, and that's huge, and that's the brighter of the 2 stars that are together, the bigger of the 2 stars. And the little dot that you see kind of out there by one of the starbursts on the bottom left, that's Sirius B. The thing is we see this as 1 star. We see Sirius as this one thing, and it's super bright and it's super amazing. And I use this to start the conversation about departmental sites, because this is the kind of experience that people say, well, this is what a departmental site should be. We should have a departmental site. But what we don't realize is that it's not a site, right? It's not, we should have 1 departmental site. We should actually have 2 departmental sites, right? And it's sort of like this decanter here, the oil and vinegar together, but see, they're still separate. And that's the thing. We have a very different set of things that we're trying to put together in the same space. Because when we are talking about a departmental site, we don't mean the same thing. All right, so for those of you who are in the United States, if you ever had a U.S. history class in your high school, in your college education or whatever, you got to see Mount Rushmore. And Mount Rushmore was amazing, right? And the view that you always get of Mount Rushmore when you're looking at the history books is the one from the visitor center, and you're like, whoa, those are big. And that's the view, that's the picture that people have in their mind of Mount Rushmore. But see, here's the thing, like this is just a different view of Mount Rushmore. This happens to be from the air. I took this picture several years ago, and it is the presidents, the faces, they call them the faces out there, the faces, and it's them, but seen from a different perspective. And see, this is the thing, is when we talk about a departmental site, we're talking about these two different animals. In fact, one of the things that we're talking about is kind of the inside view, and the other thing is the outside view. So we're talking about the departmental site. Some people care about the gears and the inner workings and the springs and the pieces of the watch that make it tell the right time, right? And these are the people who work for the department. These are the people that are like, I work here, I'm in IT, so I need to do this. And there's a whole bunch of other people. In fact, these are the people that are typically more important for the kinds of things that people think about for the departmental sites, that don't care about any of the gears and any of the timing and any of the springs and any of that. They want to know the time. And they buy a watch not so that they can decompose it, but rather so that they can tell the time. And so when we talk about a departmental site, one of the challenges we have is that the departmental site isn't one site. It's the stuff that we want to show the rest of the world, and it's the stuff that we need to internally operate so that we can give the rest of the world what they want, so we can give them services. So I know I'm trying to really impress upon you what you think of as one departmental site. What you think of as one thing isn't. It's two. And the clarity that you can get on, I don't have one thing, I have two things, makes it so much easier to begin to process, to begin to work with the information you have and get it into these two buckets. And what you find is, in the end, it's just so much more manageable. Okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, so creator versus consumer, right? And we've all heard icebergs beneath the water, right? But you think about this: creators, the people who are creating the content, they're interested in their ease to store. How easy is it to put things into the system? By the way, we've slipped into a little bit of an information architecture conversation, right? And it's like, I care about this. This is why, by the way, when people create SharePoint sites and they're like, oh, you've got to have 53 fields of metadata, and they're all required, and everybody's got to do this. That's why that never works. It never works because the creators, the people that are doing the content, don't want to do 53 metadata fields. But the other side of this is that there's the creators that are concerned about the storage. The consumers are super interested in, how easy is it to retrieve information? How can I find information on this departmental site? How can I get the information? How do I use this? And so this is that fundamental difference. And the easier we make it to retrieve information, the metadata, and we all know the metadata is easier for retrieval and better and blah, blah, blah. The more we do that, the harder we make it for the people who are putting it in. And so we've got to find ways to be efficient about what we're doing. We want to make sure that when we're going to store a lot of files really quickly, and people aren't really probably going to retrieve them that much, or if it's going to be retrieval, it's going to be me. Well, we want to make sure that those are easy to store. But for the stuff that's departmental, let's say that you're an HR department and it's employee benefits, those are going to get retrieved over and over and over and over and over again. You know what? We can spend a little bit of extra time in the storage process to make the retrieval process better. You know, one of the things that Calvin Moore said, and this is 1959, right? Like, this is not new news, is that we use a retrieval system only when it's less painful than the alternatives, right? And he said it in a nicer way, but basically, we've got to figure out a way to make the retrieval process easier. We've got to make it so that when people want to go find stuff, they can. All right, so, okay, what do I mean? And here we have to think about, what are those barriers? What are those things that are getting in our way that we need to do something different about? And so this is a story, and it comes out of a book called Demand. By the way, I read a book every single week, post a book review to my blog. It's thorprojects.com. And so those are yours if you ever want to go there. And if you've ever want to read about change or information architecture, all that stuff, that's there. But so this is a book, it's a marketing book called Demand. And it tells a story about zip cars. And so zip cars are shared car ownership rental kind of deal. So it's short-term rental. It's really targeted at highly dense urban areas where most people don't own cars. It's too expensive to deal with parking and insurance and blah, blah, blah. So they just don't own them. So zip cars is trying to sell. And they go out and they're trying to sell, and they're canvassing neighborhoods, and they're trying to get people to buy in, because you got to buy into subscription and so forth. And the data was weird. They didn't understand. They were having trouble selling it, but they're like, hey, it's only a 10-minute walk to the car. By the way, you don't have a car, and it may be a 10-minute walk to the nearest metro station or underground station or whatever it is, but they couldn't sell. They couldn't get people to buy in. And they're like, this is weird. What they noticed was this discontinuity in the data. And they said, look, if they were within 5-minute walk, lots of people subscribe. If it's outside of a 5-minute walk, inside of a 10-minute walk, not very many people subscribe. And we've been using this 10-minute walk kind of threshold. And so why am I telling you this about departmental sites? What I'm telling you is, you may think that a barrier is small. The difference between a 5-minute walk and a 10-minute walk when you're trying to get to a car, totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. I mean, if you don't believe me, think major city, think traffic jam. You'll spend 5 minutes getting to the stoplight. But for them, psychologically, that thing was a huge barrier. And so as we're designing departmental sites, we've got to design them from the point of view that we want people to be able to get to it. And these little barriers, these little tiny simple things, are big barriers. Now, I'll give you an example. So this is a today thing, right? Like, so I'm working today, and one of our barriers is during a file migration, people not familiar with SharePoint, and we've made the decision to defer them getting comfortable with SharePoint. And so what we built today was the ability for us to embed into an email, one click, OneDrive synchronization. So we send them an email and we say, click here. This is where you're going to get all your files. So you click and you wait, a minute or two, and all your files are just going to magically start showing up. And we did that because the barrier of putting people in, and we land them at a SharePoint document library page. And if you've ever been there and it's been overwhelming with the 53 million options and the drop downs and the share, Andy was just talking about the shares in the upper right, and you're looking at all this stuff and you're like, oh my gosh, where's that sync button? They told me there's a sync button somewhere, right? And so you resort to drawing pictures and stuff. So we built this little thing that we can embed a link, and people, when they get it, they click on it and it just starts syncing. And that's one of those tiny barriers that we're trying to get rid of, so that people don't resist the system, so they don't resist SharePoint, they don't resist Teams, they don't resist, because we want to get these little tiny barriers out of the way. Okay, so now I'm going to slip into a little bit of neurology. The good news is it's the easy kind. So the thing is like, we're strategically lazy. I mean, I don't know about you, but man, lazy is a good thing. Our brains is about 2 to 3% of our body mass. Some of us have big heads, right? But not really. It's still only about 3% of our body mass. The thing is, though, our brains are super power hungry, right? Like not in the like climb the corporate ladder, but in the glucose consumed kind of way. And so we have in our heads this brain that consumes somewhere between 20 and 30% of our glucose, all the sugar we take in. That's our powerhouse. And you think about that and you're like, man, that's a lot of energy. And so as a result, evolution designed our brains so that they will use as little energy as possible, and they only zoom up to consuming large amounts of energy when they absolutely have to. If you've ever walked into a meeting and you're wondering why people are so stupid, this is why. They're actually not stupid. They're just lazy, strategically lazy. Because if you ask them to predict the next football game, and when we have those again, they'll be like, oh, here are the stats and this and that, and you're like, where did that come from? Anyway, so we are strategically lazy. All humans are. And so when you start to think about the consumers of the departmental site, you think about, okay, these are the people that are coming and they're going to be lazy, and so they're lazy. So how do I make it easy for them to be lazy? And then you're like, I don't really think that our company wants to enable laziness. Okay, the right kind of laziness. Some people call it working smart. I call it lazy. So how do we do that? How do we make this experience better? How do we recognize that the more difficult we make things, the less likely it is that we're going to get something? And so this is from a book called The Paradox of Choice. This is a Barry Schwartz book, and he really did this super amazing thing. All right, he found this research with people who were testing kinds of jams. Right. And so the deal was they set up 3 kinds of jams. You got to sample one of the 3 kinds and you could buy them afterwards. And so you're like, OK, 3 kinds. That's fine. Right. Like, and it's going to be strawberry and grape and whatever else. And he's like, I know how to increase sales. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do 14 different kinds of gourmet jams, and we're going to absolutely just lay this out, and we're going to rock it and sell it all day long. And then sales decreased. Like, whoa, hang on, what's going on here? We gave more choice at, boysenberry. I mean, who doesn't like a boysenberry jam? Well, what they realized was that our anxiety, note that word, anxiety, increases with the number of choices. So the people who had 3 choices of jam actually were less anxious than the people who were given 14. So what do we learn from this? Okay, fine, anxiety, like I don't like anxiety, so what do we do? So what we want to do is we want to reduce the number of choices. Now you're like, ooh, like I'm all about the options. Yeah, I get it. And certainly there are a place for options. But in the story I was just telling you about the OneDrive, there's too much on the screen. It's overwhelming. So how do we focus people in? How do we give inherent structure to what we're doing? How do we get people to be able to predict what it is that we're talking about? And so now we're firmly into information architecture. And here, the best thing for information architecture is the periodic table of the elements. And you're like, oh man, I didn't do so well in chemistry. Hang with me. You don't have to know a lot of chemistry. This is really about the magic of the organization that happened and the impact that has on people who like chemistry to be able to do things, right? And so the periodic table of the elements, and I'm not like super chem major kind of person, but I'm like, hey, just by looking at this, I can tell that the first ring of electrons, the first cloud or whatever we want to call it, shell, there's 2 of them in there. And I know that because there's only 2 things on the top row. And on the second one, there's 8. And on the third one, there's 8. And then on the next one, there's a whole bunch more that I don't even want to count. I think it's something like 18, right? So you look at this and you're like, well, okay, so now I inherently know that. That's fine, but that's not terribly useful. And then you have the right column, which are the noble gases, right? These are the things that are like, hey, leave me alone. I'm going to be okay by myself. Those tell me about the behavior. And I know where the metals are. I know where the alkalides are. And they, based on the structure, I know enough about them to really know how this all fits together. And so this is the kind of thing we want to get to, minus all the options, when we're trying to design our site. So I'm going to spend a couple of more minutes on information architecture because it's super important. I want to help you understand how people navigate, how we orient, how this all fits together. Now, I know I'm giving you lots of references as we're going through this, and so I would apologize for that, but I don't want to. I want to say, look, any of these references, go to the blog and you can read the book review. You can get some more information, or send me a note, and I'll happily try and help you find this information. This happens to be the work of Keith Lynch. Now, Keith, he was an urban planner, right? Like, he is not an IT guy. He is not a hard chemistry guy. But it was 1960, and he wrote The Image of the City. And what he was trying to do was help the planners figure out how to design cities that people like to be in. Like, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. and not gotten lost, I need your help, because Washington, D.C. was designed to be hard to follow. It was designed to confuse the enemy, right? But we want to work on the opposite premise. We want to work on how do we make it easy for people to orient. Now, this is from Rock City. If you've ever been to this place, it's right outside of Chattanooga, and you can see 7 states. Great. This is a way that we orient. It's maps and signs, right? And this is one of those things that we use. If you look carefully, you'll see landmarks. Mountains are good landmarks. Most of your major cities have some sort of a tall building, like the Eiffel Tower, and then in DC there's Washington Monument. You've got skyscrapers in the middle of most major cities, right? Like, so we've got these landmarks that we follow. If you're near mountains, as you can see here, this is near some mountains, and so you get to see the shape of the mountains, and that helps you orient. There's the paths, the way that we go, the edges, the things that protect us from we're not wandering off the path. There are districts, kind of areas, and there are nodes that connect things. So let's just take a second or two and go through that in a little more detail. So maps and signs. This is the thing that we can do to take the complex and make it less complex. This happens to be New York and their map, and how does this all fit together, and which lines, and how do you transfer, and so on and so forth. The point of this is that if someone studies a map, if somebody goes, ooh, I need to figure out how to get from Penn Station to Broadway, they can figure it out. It is not always the best choice. Remember those small barriers? These are not always small barriers. It shrinks the barrier, but it's still there. The other, I mentioned landmarks. This happens to be Point Arena. This is the westernmost point in the continental U.S. And not very far from there is where all the lines to go to Hawaii, all communication lines. So the thing is, we can see a landmark from far off. That's the point. It gives us the ability to orient. If we don't have a compass in our pocket, by the way, I don't carry a compass in my pocket, then this tells us, okay, that's west, and the mountains are over there, so that's west if you're in Denver. So landmarks are important. How do we put things out in our environment when we're designing our departmental sites that everybody can see and know where it is? There's the paths, and sometimes our paths aren't necessarily straight, but helping people know these are the places that you travel. So kind of amplifying and making your navigation both visible, and where you can, making the navigation consistent. That's super important, and with hub navigation now, we can certainly make that a lot more consistent than we have been able to in the past. Then there's the edges. Those are the boundaries. Those are the fences. Those are the things that keep A from B and so forth. And so here, the key message we can take from Keith's work is, hey, look, there are reasons for edges. There are reasons to keep things separate. There are reasons to keep our internal operations of our IT department or an HR department separate from what we publish to the rest of the organization. And then we have districts, and districts, if you've been to Chinatown, lots of cities have Chinatowns, and you have the big gates, and that's pretty. If you go to a lot of the cities in Europe, the larger cities in Europe, you'll have color coding for things like the maps and the overhead signs and the undergrounds and so forth. How do you generate a feel around something so that it feels the same and has its own unique, distinct identity that fits into the broader picture? And then the last of our things here is nodes. And how do you interconnect people? Where are those landing pages that you're going to have? Where's your corporate homepage so that you can get people from point A to point B and connect them from one place to another, get them between District A and District B. Okay, so that's a lot of context. I know that. But without that context, it's hard to understand what we need to get accomplished as an external site, right? When we're constructing an external site, we work very hard on the orientation and wayfinding. That's the section we just did. That was the information architecture block. Then we're going to talk about the services that you offer. And a lot of times people aren't very good about defining and articulating the services they offer. And a lot of folks are like, well, that's, we really do know. And I'm like, no, you know what you do. You don't necessarily know the value that you're providing for the rest of the organization. They will come for, we talk about content and answers. How do we get people the content they need? We talk about people. And this is, I think, probably one of the things that I see most frequently overlooked from a departmental site perspective is we don't make a point of connecting people. And interestingly enough, it's not the directors and the managers and the VPs that we need to connect people with. We need to connect people with the people who actually do stuff and do work and are available. And not that managers don't do work. It's just, if you have a question, it's better to call the secretary, clerk, analyst, person who's going to answer your call on phone. And then so we also have the resources that are made available. And finally, we have one that is a little difficult, and that's work management. And it's difficult because it's the one piece that needs to be in your external site so that your users, your consumers, the people who are coming to you to consume your services that you offer, it's the one piece that they need access to, and you also need access to internally. And so it sits externally, but it's a little bit odd. Okay, so here you go. This is a 6-pack. And if you're a pilot, if you've ever been trained to fly, this is what you would expect to see. You get in a plane, and even a fancy plane that's got the glass cockpit and all these bells and whistles, you still expect to see this. And this 6-pack, pilots are taught how to scan it, how to read it. I know I could get into any plane. I'm going to find this, probably in this configuration, maybe not all together, but they're going to be spread out more or less in this order. And I get that level of consistency, and I know how to fly a plane, no matter what kind of a plane it is. And this is the kind of consistency that we want to see in our external departmental sites, because this allows individuals to orient no matter which department they're looking at. If they say, oh, I go into HR and it looks totally different than accounting and totally different than IT and totally different than, they've got to spend time trying to orient and figure out, okay, so where are the people on this, and how do I make a request, and how do I, so whatever you do for the external departmental site, you want to make sure that you're being consistent. You want to find whatever those blocks are and make sure that the blocks are the same. Now, as you look at this, you're like, oh, I don't know. I can tell you, turn coordinators, they change a little bit. There's a little bit of variation. Sometimes they're vertical lines, and they don't always have the turn coordinator. The bottom is the little ball turn coordinator. The DG, that's the bottom center, that's the directional gyro. That isn't always exactly like that. Sometimes it's got, different colored marks and other things. So inside of the blocks, there's a degree of variation. It can change a little bit, and I'm going to show you a little bit of how that works with the set of examples I've got here. But generally speaking, you want to map out these big blocks so that they're consistent. All right, service catalog. What are the services that are offered, and to whom are they offered? But, and here's the hard part, this is the one that's really difficult. What is the value that they provide? You see, I work with sometimes some very, very large organizations, hundreds of thousands of people, and they have departments within departments within departments, and you're like, yeah, I got the same problem. So you have a security group inside of IT, and inside the security group, there's a group for web applications, right? And what is a service they offer? And they could say, we offer consultative support. Well, okay, but that's not a value that the consumer, the person who wants your services, is coming to buy. Oh, well, we issue SSL certificates. Well, that isn't actually what they come to buy. And I say buy, I don't mean charge back. I mean, just like, why do they come, right? And so there's this rationalization process that building a departmental site causes you to do about what services the department offers altogether. And it causes you to sometimes ask the question, what are the services that are currently in the catalog, are currently being offered, but we really should retire them or move them. The value problem, the value proposition is really in bridging the gap. It's between the solutions that you have, the things that you do, and the challenges that your users have, right? So they have some sort of necessity. Now, whether that's real need or it's a desire, like whatever, that's splitting hairs, right? Does your child need a car, or do they really just want to get away from you? Like, it's different. And so how do you convert what it is that they're asking for into what you're offering? And again, you're like, well, but my departments all say they know what they do. I got it. Everybody says, oh, I know my customers. I know what I'm doing, you know. And how many of you have gone to your HR department, try to find a 401k matching to figure out where it is, right? And it's like, oh, is it under benefits? Is it under pay? Is it under, right? Like, I don't know where it is, because they've organized it the way they think about it, not necessarily the way that anyone else in the organization thinks about it. And I had this conversation, I have this conversation with HR folks regularly, because even things like the park tickets, if you're at a big organization and it's, oh, tickets at work, that stuff they think of as a benefit. But it's not the same way that you think about benefits, because for the most part, people think about benefits as health insurance. And so how do you help the organizations? How do you help the departments figure out what it is they do? And you got to say it way nicer than that, because when you come in, you're like, hey, what do you guys do? No, you don't know what you do. They don't tend to like that very much, but it is an important aspect of how do you build this? How do you design these sites? So then there's the content. What content do you have? Content can be timely or timeless. There's policies and procedures and control documents that you need to manage, and those typically end up on the external sites so that they're accessible through the rest of the organization. There's also the there's also the things like news and so forth. And I hesitate here, because as we'll see in a minute, that's not always the best thing to put on a departmental site, at least not the only place. I talked a little bit about people, and really truthfully, the people is, how do you get people to the answers? Most people want answers from people. Most people want answers from people, not wanting them from a system. Now, we do that because it's easier and more expedient, but we'd much rather just call somebody and get the answer that we want. And so then you have resources. There we go. And resources are the, what did that department buy for the rest of the organization? And tickets at work is actually a good example, right? Like it's not so much a buy as they've entered into agreement that this can be done, so that you can get your Six Flags tickets or whatever. What are the things that you need to provide? And if it's HR, how do you connect them to the benefits site for the details? Because no HR department wants to know the details of the way that you process claims on something. They would much rather defer that to the insurer. And so how do we make sure that we capture these resources and make them available to folks? Work management, I told you, this is the thing that's kind of a split personality. It's you need it in the public site because they need to be able to see, not just be able to make a request. That's the good first part. But the second part is, how do you give them access? How do you give them a space that is a space that is going to let them work? So, all right. So then we move to this conversation about timely. So a lot of people say, oh, well, I want news on my departmental site. And as you'll find out in a minute, like, I get it. People want that. but consumers are not going to come to a site for timely content. So I'm not going to go to the HR site every week to see if they have something new to tell me. I don't go to the IT department every week to find out if they've got something new to tell me. I don't have. If you want timely content, you've got to push it to them. And I don't necessarily mean email. I don't necessarily mean that you've got to go into an email and push it that way. You can put it on the home page of the intranet, and the way that we can do search and roll-ups and stuff today is super powerful. But as we're talking about news, we need to think about the fact that they're not going to go there to get it. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't still have a home on your departmental page. It means you can't expect that people come there to find that out. They can come there to get more details. They can come there to say, oh, I know IT said something about something last week or whatever, but you can't expect that everybody's going to go, because everybody wants to be the new portal for everything, right? Like everybody's going to come to me because we're amazing, and it just doesn't work that way. Okay, so let's do one stop on wireframes, and then I'm going to move you into a couple of quick sample sites so that you can see what a site might look like in a modern design. What might a site look like? And I also want you to see that because this is a real client site that I'm going to show you, they didn't follow all the advice. One of the things that I've learned as a consultant is that you can show people what in general is the best answer, but you don't always get the kind of results that you want when they have to satisfy internal constituents as well. So this is just a layout. It is not the layout. And so here, the focus is you have a top navigation. Hopefully that's hub navigation, so that the navigation is consistent across at least all of the sites in that section, thinking districts, right? So we're back to Keith Lynch in districts. Then you have the services offered. Now you can do that several different ways. Sometimes it's a list, as you see here, and it's how do I go make the service request? How do I get to that thing that I'm asking for? How do I make a new one? Who's the primary contact? Underneath that, you see the departmental contacts. These are the people that you really want to connect with. You'll notice that the first person in that list is the department coordinator. And whether you call that an admin or a receptionist or whatever you call that, that's the first person I send people to, because that's the person that answers their phone most of the time. And then on this is a resource library, and that's really kind of a placeholder for, okay, so where else do you want to go? If we were to continue this wireframe below the fold, we might have news, we might have key policies or key procedures, we might have just a whole bunch of things, right? And then of course you get your standard framing. You've got the upper right, which is user and that kind of stuff. Left side, this has got a quick launch on it, a left navigation. I know that's not popular anymore in the newer designs, but for this particular wireframe, it was designed to provide a secondary navigation and not take most of the main space up to do navigation, because what we find is you've got different kinds of navigation. You have top navigation or top navigation. I'll skip that. Then there's left navigation and so forth. And if you don't do those things, then you end up with content navigation, which is the navigation, the way that you help people get on those paths and get from place to place is in the content. Okay, so this is my sample. And I'm going to, so there are a couple of pieces to this. This was built prior to some of the newer availability of menus. So this is actually a custom menu that includes both search. It does do a mega menu. It does drop downs, and it does all the really fancy stuff that Microsoft's really kind of just now rolling out. But we had to have this done a couple of years ago. So there's that. You see the hero web part, the big pictures in what it is. So trying to give people visual anchors, landmarks, things that they can, hey, I know this halogen thing is, I know what that looks like. And so I can visually anchor on it versus reading it. From a neurological point of view, it's much, much easier for us to process a picture than to be reading words. There's also a little bit of consistency. These don't move. And because they don't move, people get used to, oh, I clicked the middle top row. You'll see here that they've got an about human resources, because this is the human resource site that I've got sampled for you. I actually hate this. I told them that as nicely as I could. That's useful one time to tell you you're in the right place if you're unable to read the title. Everybody pretty much knows what a HR group does, and if you wanted to do something more detailed, you could have a mission that you get through the left rail or even in the hero. Underneath that is quick links. So these are the things that, these are the most likely reasons why someone is coming to this site, right? And so again, reducing barriers, how do I get people to the right places? You'll also notice here down on the bottom, there's the there's news, right? And I told you the news is going to be not, it's not going to be it's not going to be the thing that people will come to, but they may come back for it. Oh, hey, there's an employee referral bonus. It's $1,000 at the moment. So that that news is good as an archive, and it also means that it's in search, so that when they go to search, they can go, oh, employee referral in this context, and it's right there. So here's a different example. This is accounting. Now, accounting decided they didn't need a left navigation, but you still find the same pattern, right? So the pattern includes the hero web part, and in this case, they only have 3 things instead of the 5 that the other had. They still have the accounting statement. Again, I'm not a huge fan of that, but they have it and it's consistent. I know which part of the page I can ignore. And then I have quick links, and I have the things that people are most often coming for, and in news. So what you see here is there is some variation, right? Inside of the box, there's variation, but it's not a lot of variation. One other thing that I wanted to offer to you in terms of an idea is some sort of a visual navigation where you can navigate through levels. My client I was telling you is a very, very large client, and it's, you know, it's IT, and then it's operations, and then it's security, and then it's innocence. And so we kind of have this little model here that gives you the context of where you are, level 1, level 2. So the bottom might be IT, second might be operations, and then underneath that would be maybe 5 choices. And that gives you the visual reference for kind of where you are. Okay, so we've been talking about the external site because that's the one, honestly, that's the one that I get the most questions about. When we're having conversations, this is the one that everybody asks me about. But I want to move inside. This is by the way, this is a Fresnel lens. This is what's in the top of a Lighthouse. The light bulbs you see there's an automatic changer so that if the light goes out, the bulb swings into place, and it's super cool. And most people haven't had a chance to see the inside of lighthouses. So there you go. Now you've seen the inside of a lighthouse. You have yet another different perspective. So when we're talking about internal, we generally are talking about the question is now, should it be a Microsoft team or a SharePoint site? And my answer to that is typically, yeah, Teams creates a SharePoint site, and Teams is going to add threaded conversations and audio video conferencing and email integration and blah, 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 blah. When I build internal sites for departments, I almost always am doing a team. Almost always these days, I'm doing a team. If I did it in the past and I had a SharePoint site and they want to add Teams, I typically will go attach the team to the old SharePoint site, make that all marry up, because I want them to have one place that they can work, one place that they can work together. So this leads me to another question, because it's, you know, the next question is going to be how many teams? And to answer that, I need to tell you that we are designed for relationships. And there's this guy, Robin Dunbar, he's out of the UK, and he's an anthropologist, and he did this work to map the size of primate neocortex to the number of stable social relationships. Man, this guy is fun at a party. You think about this. You want to do neurocontext with blah, blah, like that guy, got to be a great guy. Anyway, so what he did was he said, look, I've got this number, and he came up with this number, and it directly relates to the size of the neocortex of primates, and it's the number of stable social relationships. For humans, it's somewhere between 100 and 250. Now, normally when this number is given to people, they'd say 150, and you'll see why that's important here in just a second. Now, what you can infer from this is Facebook friends are not stable social relationships, because most of us have more than 150 Facebook friends. And if you don't, send me a request. I'll friend you, because you should have 150 Facebook friends, even if you don't have 150 friends in real life. And that sounded really sad, and I didn't mean it to be that way, but really, we are inundated by friends and followers and LinkedIn connections and all this stuff. And you're like, hey, I cannot have stable social relationships with everybody. So I need that to be able to get you to how many teams should you have? And so the answer is, if you have less than 12 people, that's kind of like a discipleship. That you should just it should be one group, right? If you can't get 12 people to mostly get along and agree and talk to each other, I think you have bigger issues than Microsoft Teams. Now, the other side of this is, if you've got more than 150 people, you've got more than one team. And I can tell you that because you can't maintain relationships with people, therefore you can't trust them. And if you can't trust them, you're unlikely going to be able to share and be open with them. So I have the two boundary conditions, right? 12 and 150. It's in the middle that it gets a little difficult. In the middle, a lot of it's based on how much trust and how much need, not want, need for secrecy is there. So for instance, one of my clients has a IT group, total IT group, 8 people. They initially started with, hey, we're going to have 4 teams for IT. So I kind of decided that was probably not a best practice. And so we talked about it, and they realized that they can use the channel functionality inside of Teams to do that. And back then when we made this decision, we didn't have private channels. By the way, avoid private channels at all costs. If you absolutely have to do them, you have to do them, but they're evil. If you've ever seen Time Bandit, and at the end where they pull out the scorched meatloaf out of the microwave, Time Bandit, that evil, yeah, don't touch that. Anyway, so try to get to a number of teams where you have a team doesn't have more than 150 people, unless it's a big group that you're not really using for collaboration. It's an alternative form of communication. And think about how you build trust inside that group so that you can decide. Okay, so limiting the creation of Office 365 groups. The way that we limit the automatic creation of teams, which I strongly suggest you do immediately. Because if not, you're going to have 35 million teams on 3 people. So you can do this. It requires an Azure P1 license to run the tool, and anyone in the group that's allowed to create post running the tool needs it, or they need to be an admin role defined in central admin or tenant admin. So the idea is that you can restrict the creation to a security group. So you can say, oh, my really cool people can create groups, but nobody else can. More often what you do is you create a group creation request tool that routes through some semi-automated approval, and that semi-automated approval results in the group being created for them, generally very quickly, very low friction. But the objective is very much to is very much to put a little bit of limiting. There's some stuff built into the system now for some scanning and stuff. I find that for most of my clients, it's still not enough for them. I also get asked about the scope of the consistency. They're like, hey, you said a lot about external sites being consistent. What about internal sites? My answer is, you're not going to be in multiple departments unless you're in IT, and it's about how they work internally. So let them do whatever they want, right? If they want to have the dancing bunny and they want to have purple and pink colors, I just don't care, as long as they can get the business objective done. All right, last thing, and this is I'm going to just throw this up here really quickly, and say sometimes organizations struggle with the separation, and they're like, hey, we got to do something, but we're not really ready to separate things. And so sometimes we will help to distinguish the published official artifacts, the controlled documents, the things that are super important, the public, the stuff that everybody should have access to, and then we'll have private or sensitive information that should be contained inside the group. And we do that with document libraries. We can leverage a little bit of magic in search to try and encourage search to go display the published articles first, in addition to being able to do the rule scopes and best bets and those sorts of things to really call out one thing or one specific area. But in general, we can sort of emphasize the published area because that's something that the department really publishes. Okay, so I'm going to move to Q&A, and I'm going to tell you I can't find the Q&A window. I don't know where it went. It disappeared. So I'm going to ask my wonderful moderators to help me out a little bit and help me with any questions that you may have asked while we were chatting. While I was chatting.
Yeah, we have some questions that you can take it from Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason my system has decided it doesn't like Q&A, and so it won't bring it up. Do you mind reading them?
Should I repeat the question and then you can answer?
Yes, please.
All right, so Catherine said, great conference shirt. In your next meeting, they are not stupid, just strategically lazy. Departmental sites for MS365 conferences. That just, I don't know. This session.
So,
yeah.
So can you read that to me again? I'm sorry. I just turned your volume up.
All right. It said it's a great conference. In your next meeting, they are not stupid, just strategically lazy. Departmental sites for M365 conference. I don't know, like, what is that he's trying to explain?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Exactly.
Okay.
I just probably go and discard that.
Okay.
And then the next thing is the session video available later? Yes, from the community. It's gonna be on Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon channel on YouTube, where you can find it. And maybe worth adding your slides later, or maybe on Twitter, or maybe you can write your email address back in the chat, or maybe you can send it to me. I can pass on this here. And mostly the people are asking, can you explain the issue with private channels in the Teams?
Can I explain? Yeah. Well, so first of all, totally get this was the most requested thing. It was the thing that Microsoft felt like they had to do to compete with other people in the market. And the implementation has left a lot to be desired. So so I do a fair amount of records management work. And so private channels are super private. Like a records manager, a discovery manager actually can't get access to them. They may have that one fixed at the moment, but there are just a number of issues with private channels and the way that they're used. For me, when I see clients say, "Oh, I have to have a private channel," it always means there is a breakdown in trust. And so rather than go implement a private channel that now all of a sudden your backups break and your DLP break, your digital loss protection or digital leakage protection breaks, or records management breaks, or discovery breaks, or with all of this stuff, like, why don't we go fix the trust issue? Why don't we go figure out where that trust issue is, and then go address it, right? And if it's either a trust issue with IT, in which case they don't think that even creating a separate team is going to get them the protection they need, which is why they're using private channels, or it's an internal issue within the team, right? And so you're in an IT team, maybe the DevOps folks or maybe the ops folks don't get along with the developers, right? And so they're each like, well, I have to have a private channel. What are you saying that you cannot say to the other team, right? Like, so it creates a ton of infrastructure problems, and they're not going away, by the way. Microsoft's working on making them better, but fundamentally you can't have exclusionary isolation and it works with all the magical goodness of Microsoft. think about it from the point of view of, say, Cortex, right? Project Cortex. How do you assimilate that data if it's so locked down? So that's one of the reasons why private channels is bad. I've got we would be here more than 36 hours if I were to go through the entire list. It's just a very dangerous tool, and for me, it's always an indication of some other kind of trust problem.
All right. And the second question is, when you say limit the creation of Office 365 groups, I know that when you create a team site, it automatically creates a group site. Are these two sites independent of each other that you can limit the creation of group, but you keep the team site?
Yeah, so what really is happening is, the group, the Office 365 group, creates the SharePoint team site. It also creates a mailbox, but the group is actually the container, and Teams is actually sitting on top of it. So you cannot directly interfere with the automatic creation of Teams, which is actually what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to I don't want to make it super hard, but I want to make it harder than it currently is. Click the button. Oh my gosh, I've got a new team. Because then you end up with all these orphan teams and people get confused because they've got too many options. Which team is the real team? Is it the team or the other team? And so by limiting the creation of Office 365 groups, what we do is we prevent users from being able to create a team. And that's, like I say, that's intentional. You don't want it to be super hard, but you want it to be hard enough.
Right.